Good afternoon and welcome to this pre-summit press conference. We'll start with a statement from the Secretary General and then we will turn to your questions.
Good afternoon and welcome to my hometown, The Hague, for the 2025 NATO Summit. And this is my first NATO Summit as Secretary General and the first NATO Summit to be hosted by the Netherlands. As a Dutchman and as a native of this beautiful city, it is particularly meaningful to me that we gather here this week. And we meet at a truly historic moment with significant and growing challenges to our security. As the world becomes more dangerous, allied leaders will take bold decisions to strengthen our collective defense, making NATO a stronger, a fairer, and a more lethal alliance. This will include a major new defense investment plan, ranging the benchmark for defense investment to 5% of GDP. A concerted effort to ramp up defense industry across the alliance, bringing not only greater security, but also more jobs. And a continued focus on support for Ukraine, alongside the pursuit of a just and lasting end to Russia's war of aggression. All of this is essential to keeping our 1 billion citizens safe. Let me now first say a word on Iran. When it comes to NATO's stance on Iran's nuclear program, allies have long agreed that Iran must not develop a nuclear weapon. Allies have repeatedly urged Iran to meet its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. On defense investment, in 2014, allies agreed to a benchmark of investing 2% of GDP in defense. And it is very good news that all allies will now meet that target this year. We started 2025 with several allies, 7, 8 allies, not meeting the mark. So we have made crucial progress in the last 5-6 months. But our security environment has changed, and not for the better. The threats we face today demand that we do far, far more to ensure we can effectively deter and defend. NATO has detailed defense plans in place. We know how to tackle the dangers that confront us. And we are committed to defending every inch of allied territory, should any potential adversary make the mistake of attacking any ally. Based on those plans, allies have agreed an ambitious new set of capability targets, the specific, practical requirements that ensures that we can implement our defense plans. Having done this high-stakes homework, it is now clear what kind of investment it will take to effectively deliver what we need. And it is critical that each ally carries their fair share of the burden. The defense investment plan that allies will agree in The Hague introduces a new baseline, 5% of GDP to be invested in defense. This is a quantum leap that is ambitious, historic, and fundamental to securing our future. The new defense investment plan is the key deliverable for this summit and will be decisive when it comes to ensuring effective deterrence in defense. The details of our plans are, of course, classified. But let me give you a few examples of what we will invest in. A 5-fold increase in air defense capabilities, because we see Russia's deadly terror from the skies over Ukraine every day. And we must be able to defend ourselves from such attacks. Thousands more tanks and armored vehicles. Because even though warfare is changing fast, we still need to be able to protect our soldiers on the battlefield and to maneuver. And millions of rounds of artillery ammunition. Because it is by having these stockpiles that we can deter aggression from any threat. As we invest more, it is crucial that we also produce more. At present, there is not nearly enough supply to meet our increased demand on either side of the Atlantic. For this, we need to work closely with industry, the major players that are the foundation of our defense industrial base, as well as the newer players that will help as we innovate and ensure our technological edge going forward. It also means working together with our close partners, including Ukraine, the European Union, and our partners from the Indo-Pacific. We are already working on this. And tomorrow at the NATO Summit Defense Industry Forum, we will continue to see new orders and concrete cooperation to expand our defense industrial base. We are sending a clear demand signal. We need industry to respond, and we need industry to respond quickly. Because there is an urgent need. But there is also a tremendous upside to ramping up our defense production. Not only will we be more secure, but there is huge economic potential for our societies, including more jobs for our people. By investing more and producing more, we build a stronger NATO. The result is also a fairer NATO, as allies step up to ensure there is more equal sharing of responsibility for our shared security. As we become stronger and fairer, we will also demonstrate that while NATO is and will remain a defensive alliance, there should be no doubt about our ability and resolve to protect our nations and respond with resounding force should we be attacked. This is what it means to be a more lethal alliance. So as leaders begin together for the NATO summit here, this is our focus, ensuring that we have all we need to deter and defend against any threat. Of course, the most significant and direct threat facing this alliance remains the Russian Federation. Moscow continues to wage war against Ukraine with the support of North Korea, Iran, and China, as well as Belarus. We all want peace for the Ukrainian people and an end to the terrible war against them. Yet as work is ongoing in pursuit of a just and lasting peace, we must continue to make sure Ukraine has what it needs to defend today and deter in the future. Our support for Ukraine is unwavering and will persist. And we have, I can announce that now, new estimates showing that our European and Canadian allies have stepped up and have already pledged, where we originally would be able to announce a 20 billion over the first 3 months of this year. It is now, they will provide over 35 billion euros of additional security assistance to Ukraine for the year ahead. So in a couple of months, we went from 20 billion to 35 billion. And I think that is great news. So here in The Hague, allies will reaffirm our ongoing support for Ukraine. And we will be joined by President Zelensky and his team for a range of different meetings over the next days. We also have the opportunity to engage with our partners in the Indo-Pacific, with the leadership of the European Union, and with our citizens across the alliance through the NATO Public Forum that will kick off tomorrow morning. And with that overview, I look forward to your questions.
All right, we'll start here in the front row. This woman here all the way on the right.
Secretary General, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, now that we see the United States directly involved in the conflict in Iran, are you concerned that that impacts their view of their obligations to NATO, that it perhaps pushes NATO further down the list of priorities?
I don't think so. Of course, the news about Iran is at this moment grabbing all the headlines. And it is, of course, important news. But this summit is really about making sure that the whole of NATO, 1 billion people, will be safe not only today, but also in 3, 5, 7 years from now. And Iran, let's not forget, Iran is heavily involved in the fight of Russia against Ukraine by, for example, their drones deliveries, which are killing innocent Ukrainians every day in cities, in communities without any respect for life. So there is also a close connection between Iran of course, North Korea, China, Belarus, but also Iran with Russia when it comes to the war in Ukraine. So no doubt it will emerge in the discussions.
Okay, we'll come to the second row here on the aisle.
It's me. Thank you very much. Mr. Rutte, can you confirm that all allies, so not only Spain, are free to spend as much money as they want, as long as they guarantee that they will fulfill the capability targets? And if so, what's this 5% worth after all?
Well, I would not buy the assumption in your question. So what we will agree as an alliance is a 5% target to spend on GDP when it comes to our collective defense. Some of us are already there almost. Take the United States. They're already spending almost 3.5% on the core defense. And no doubt they are close to spending the 1.5% on defense related. And countries like Estonia and Poland are very close. And for many others, it will still be a long road ahead. But really important that we do this.
All right, let's go to the fourth row. Gentlemen, 3 in.
Secretary General, thank you, Luis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Luis Tovares, Spanish TV. Secretary General, yesterday you reached an agreement with Spain that it gives flexibility to meet the targets without reaching the 5%. So why this exception for Spain, and what message does it send to other countries that also believe that it's not necessary to reach 5% to meet its goals, and especially considering that Spain is right now the ally that spends the least? So, and the last question, do you think that Donald Trump agrees with this exception? Thank you.
Well, all allies agreed with the statement, and all allies agree with the capability targets. The defense ministers a couple of weeks ago nailed down the capability targets. And as you know, we are an alliance where we fight together, and if necessary, where we also suffer and die together for our collective defense. And I've always had the highest respect for Spain's contribution to NATO. They are active all over NATO territory in many missions. And Spain has also agreed with the targets. The fact is that Spain thinks they can achieve those targets on a percentage of 2.1%. NATO is absolutely convinced. NATO is absolutely convinced Spain will have to spend 3.5% to get there. So each country will now regularly report on what they are doing in terms of spending and reaching the targets. So we will see. And anyway, there will be a review in 2029.
Okay, let's come to this side of the room. We'll go to the front row, the gentleman in the beige jacket.
Lauri Nurmi, security policy correspondent from Iltalehti, Finland. Dear Secretary General, 2 weeks ago, you said in London that Russia could be ready to use military force against NATO within 5 years, and repeated it in 5 years. Could you please tell us, what is this assessment based on? And can Russia attack Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, or any other NATO nation located in the eastern flank of NATO? Thank you.
There's widespread agreement within NATO that at this moment, today, if Russia would attack us, our reaction will be devastating, and the Russians know this. But there is great worry in many circles of NATO. We have heard the chief of defense in Germany a couple of weeks ago, and many other senior military leaders speaking about this, and also senior intelligence community people speaking about this, that between 3, 5, 7 years from now, Russia will be able to successfully attack us if we do not start investing more today. The question could be, why do you then give this time frame to 2035? Well, of course, we will start today. That means yearly increments. There will be a huge extra defense spend already in the next 3 to 5 years. There's also time we need to make sure that that defense spend can be absorbed by, of course, hiring more soldiers, making sure that you can buy all the military equipment you need to buy without raising the prices. But that means 3, 5, 7 years from now, we will gradually build a NATO which is so strong that not only today, but also in 3, 5, 7 years and 10 years from now, nobody, not the Russians, but please be watchful what China is doing with its rapid build-up of its military. Already the same amount as ships sailing in their navy compared to the United States, and that will grow into 450 ships by 2030. 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. And we have to be sure and make sure that you can defend ourselves against them.
All right, let's come to the center front row, the gentleman in the glasses.
Thank you for the floor. Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Last days, we have intensified attacks of Russia to the civilian objects in Ukraine. Tonight, at least six people only in Kiev died and around 20 were wounded. So my question is NATO considered that like some kind of challenge just straight before the start of a NATO summit? And could we expect, if not reaction, but some kind of assessment of this situation from a leader's side? And the second question, if I may, tomorrow you will have a trilateral meeting with EU and Ukraine. Can we expect you raise the question how EU can replace American assistance, which is not granted anymore? And could it be a reality for EU to replace that kind of assistance? Thank you.
Well, first, on your first question, the attacks on innocent civilians, on cities, on communities in Ukraine, without any military goal, I totally find abhorrent. We hold Russia fully responsible for this. It is against any rule, international rule. And anyway, this whole attack starting in 2014 and a full-scale attack starting end of February 2022 is unprovoked, is totally by everybody in NATO seen as something we collectively have to fight back on, making sure that Ukraine has what it needs with our support to take that fight concretely from step to step and make sure that they can defend Ukrainian territory. This is the reason why I think also last year in Washington, NATO allies agreed that for Ukraine there is an irreversible path of Ukraine to enter NATO. And that is still true today, and it will still be true on Thursday after this summit. When it comes to your second question, as I announced, we thought for this year 20 billion was pledged by Canada and the European allies. It is now over 35 billion. Last year, it was just over 50 billion for the full year. This year, not even before we reached the 1st of July, so the half-year mark, we are already at over 35 billion. So this shows you, and this is the evidence, that nobody in Europe, in Canada, including, by the way, the United States, loses sight of what is happening in Ukraine.
All right, we'll come back to this side of the room. The gentleman here in the front row in the dark suit.
James Bayes, Al Jazeera. Secretary General, NATO's position for more than 3 years has been very consistent. It's been criticising Russia for breaching the rules-based international order by invading Ukraine. Doesn't all of that seem very hypocritical, given the US's recent actions, which are clearly dubious under international law?
Well, I don't agree with that assessment at all. Obviously, NATO is concentrated on the Euro-Atlantic, but I do not at all, not one syllable of your assessment, sorry, on what you just said. With all the respect, of course, for your news outlet, which I always respect, but I think you have this completely wrong.
All right, and staying in the front row, the woman here.
Maria Vasiliou, Tanea, Greece. Back to the defense spending plan, you said there is going to be a review in 2029. How are you going to ensure until then that there is credible growth in spending by all members? And also, I mean, in other words, taking also into consideration the exemption for Spain, how are you going to ensure that this pledge, this plan does not become another empty promise? Thank you.
Well, let me first say on your particularly alluding to Spain, NATO has no opt-outs. And NATO doesn't know side deals or side deals. So that's on the particular question you ask about Spain. What all allies will do is that, of course, they have the sovereign right and also the flexibility to determine their path for delivering on the NATO commitments. That means how much they will spend annually, and this is exactly what we are doing. The big difference from the Welsh pledge in 2014 is this, that there will be annual reports on what nations are spending. There will be regular reviews on what is happening. In 29, we will take stock, including on the international security situation, whether we might need to increase the amount of spending we need to do as a collective alliance, for example.
All right, front row here on the corner.
Laurențiu Ungureanu, Hot News Romania, Secretary General. 9 years ago, at the summit in Warsaw, the alliance officially recognized that hybrid threats and information warfare pose real challenges to member security. With rising hybrid attacks, including manipulation campaigns, especially on NATO eastern flank and in the Black Sea region, how can member states determine when such aggression is serious enough to justify a collective response?
Well, obviously, we are not making our adversaries any wiser than they are today when that comes to the specific question. But your question raises a very important issue. And that is the important issue of hybrid threats, the important issue of cyber attacks. And let me again state that I hate that word hybrid because it sounds too cuddly. And it is very serious. This can be assassination attempts, the jamming of commercial airplanes in the Baltic, an attack on the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. So this is very serious. And that is one of the reasons why on the list of discussions for tomorrow, this is a big issue. Hybrid, including, of course, cyber.
All right, the third row, gentleman on the end.
Thank you. My name is Ruslan Ignatovich. I'm journalist, Belsat TV, Poland. Mr. Secretary General, does NATO see a real threat of a possible new Russian invasion from the territory of Belarus during or after so-called Zapad 2025 Russian-Belarusian military exercises into Ukraine or into the Baltic states?
Well, as I said, our alliance is so strong today that if Russia would try something today, they know our reaction will be devastating. So it would be very, very unwise by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin or his crony in Belarus, in Minsk, to try anything against us. But obviously, we have to be sure that in 3, 5, 7 years from now, we are as strong as we are today. And that is why it is urgent that in this meeting, we will not only decide on the higher defense spending, but because of the changed security situation, we will have to spend more. So that when the call comes for each of our allies to chip in a collective endeavor to defend NATO territory, to defend every inch of NATO territory, that everybody is ready, has not only committed on paper, but also in reality, in terms of what they need to deliver to that collective endeavor. And let's not forget, I think it was in the FT this morning, an article making the difference between an alliance based on I will help you if you get attacked. Of course, that is what NATO will do, Article 5, but NATO is more. We have the plans in place, we have the structures in place, the command and control systems in place to make sure that we can immediately scale what each nation has at its individual level to make sure that they can then deploy that to the collective endeavor when we get attacked. My worry is two things, that if we do not spend more, that's in 3, 5, 7 years from now, we might not be able to do that. And secondly, that with the present level of defense production, which is also part of your deterrence, if we don't ramp that up, that's why this is next to Ukraine and the defense spending, one of the 3 issues at the summit, that our deterrence will not be strong enough. And that is why this ramping up defense spending is such an important subject.
Okay. All right. The woman in the blue jacket, about a third of the way back.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra von with DW, Germany's international public service broadcaster. One more question on the situation in the Middle East and Iran's threats to retaliate. NATO still has a mission in Iraq, so can you tell us what kind of protective measures have been undertaking to protect this mission? Thank you.
Yeah, obviously I cannot directly answer that question because that is very delicate to talk about that in public, about these type of precautions. But you can be assured that allies are in constant contact. NATO as an alliance and all the allies when it comes to the situation in the Middle East and how that could impact our collective interests in the Middle East. And of course, when it comes to the Middle East itself, Iran, our allies are urgently and on daily basis navigating that crisis.
Okay, in the row just behind her, the gentleman.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General, you mentioned the Pacific partners. 3 of them have declined to be present with the government leaders. With the threat of China in the back of our minds, what consequence does their absence have? And have you tried urging them to reconsider?
Well, we are in very close touch, basically from week to week, month to month with our 4 partners, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea. I was visiting Japan early April, and we know that not only for us, but also for them, this relationship with NATO and between NATO and Indo-Pacific is crucial. Not because we want to extend Article 5 to the Indo-Pacific, but we know that the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific arena are closely connected. And even more since the end of February 2022. North Korea and China and Iran, but in this case particularly focusing on China and North Korea, ramping up Russia in its attack, or unprovoked attack on Ukraine. So we will have very senior representatives here. We will have important meetings coming up. And you will always see in summits like this that the program changes from day to day a little bit. So here you have one of those examples. But I would not read too much into that.
All right, coming to this section, the gentleman with the glasses in the 6th row.
Okay. Hello, Edward Lucas and The Times. You've talked about the need to improve air defences fivefold. The problem here is the countries that most need air defences are the least able to afford them, the smaller and poorer members of the alliance in the East. It's the bigger, richer countries, perhaps even like this one, that could afford to contribute but won't necessarily be in the forefront of a Russian air and missile attack. Can you see any way in which the alliance can spread the burden of air defences so that the rich who can pay help the poor who can't? And can you envisage even this might stretch over to Ukraine, which needs it most of all?
Well, for Ukraine, on the one hand, it's easy, and at the same time, it's very difficult. So when it comes to Ukraine, there is no debate that we all acknowledge, the US, Canada, all European allies, that Ukraine needs more air defense systems. And in Washington, there was this agreement on the irreversible path into NATO, but also the very concrete agreement to make sure that Ukraine would have more air defense systems. Luckily, on that commitment, most of that commitment has been delivered, but it is not enough to make sure that Ukraine is safe. More air defense systems are needed for Ukraine. The problem, of course, is that there are not too many companies producing them, and there is always a shortage of everything. So here, one of the things I personally, SACEUR, the whole of NATO is working on very hard with all allies to make sure that whatever we can supply to Ukraine, we will supply to Ukraine. On your other part of your question, it starts with all the allies making sure that they get to delivering the capability targets, and that means in reaching the 5%, including the 3.5% on core defense. It's true that air defense systems can be very expensive. So when it comes to concrete issues on that, we will be able to solve that, no doubt. But first, also the countries with a smaller budget need to show that at least they have the plans in place to get to the 5%. I think it starts there. And if there are then still problems in terms of procuring, you can always sit together and see what can be possible.
All right, and then just in front of him, gentleman in the dark suit.
Thank you, Daniel Tkie, First Western TV and News Channel 24, Ukraine. NATO-Ukraine Council will not hold a formal meeting during the summit. Also, according to recent publications of various media, Ukraine, there is a possibility that Ukraine would not be included in final communique of this summit. Don't you feel that the war in Ukraine is being put on the back burner of this summit?
No, to the contrary. So we have one session with the 32 leaders. In the past, you would have sessions with the EU, with the Indo-Pacific 4, with Ukraine. Here we made the choice to have one concentrated session with the 32, and around that session with the 32, many smaller sessions. So you will see the president of Ukraine, but also other senior leaders of Ukraine sitting in various formats with leaders over the next couple of days. So that's what, when it comes to the summit program on Ukraine, EU, Indo-Pacific 4. But when it comes to the meeting with the 32, one meeting with the 32, so that's more like London 29, then Brussels 2019, then Brussels 2018. So we're very focused. When it comes to the support for Ukraine, I don't agree. You will find in the communique, which has now been agreed by the ambassadors, so the North Atlantic Council, you will see important language about Ukraine, including connecting the defense spending up to 2035 to Ukraine and the need for Ukraine to stay in the fight. This is a clear commitment by allies. And the fact that this year, already, not even having reached the half-year mark of the 1st of July, we are now at a total pledge of 35 billion compared to last year. For the full year, a little over 50 billion shows you that it is rather increasing than decreasing. And I think that's very positive and necessary because we need to bring that fight in Ukraine, this terrible Russian onslaught, to a durable and lasting peace.
Okay, and then just across the aisle, the gentleman in the light suit.
That's a very...
Okay. May I stand up?
With a lot of orange.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Helmut Hetzel, foreign correspondent here in this lovely city, The Hague. And I have two questions for you, Mr. Secretary General. First of all, do you have reliable information that the United States managed to destroy all the nuclear facilities of Iran? That's the first one. And the second question is, I go back to the Asian Pacific region, because there is also the conflict between China and Taiwan. And there is the Chinese-Taiwan Relation Act. That means that the United States are obliged to support, even maybe defend Taiwan if getting attacked by China. Is NATO prepared for this worst-case scenario in the Asian-Pacific region?
Well, on your first question, I have no news I can convey here. So, I mean, of course, NATO is very much concentrated and watching the Euro-Atlantic. But as I said, individual allies clearly navigating the crisis now in the Middle East, and particularly in close consultation with the American ally when it comes to Iran and the impact it will have on the region. And I already mentioned to you the statements earlier by NATO that we should prevent collectively to make sure, as a world community, that Iran would not get to a nuclear capability, violating the NPT. To your second question, as I said, we have this close relationship now with Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, exactly for the reason that these countries are very, very worried about the massive military build-up China at the moment is taking place. We know that out of the 10 biggest defense companies, only a couple of years ago, you would not find any Chinese companies. At this moment, you will find 3 to 5 Chinese defense companies in the top 10 of biggest defense companies in the world. And this shows you that this massive build-up is taking place and is having a huge impact also when it comes to the defense industrial production of China. And of course, they don't do this only because they want to have nice parades in Beijing. I guess it's there for a reason. And we are all very worried, of course, about the situation in Taiwan. And we also know that there is a risk that if the Chinese would try anything with Taiwan, that no doubt he will call his junior partner, Mr. Putin, and make sure that the junior partner in that relationship with China, Mr. Putin, will keep us busy here, if that would happen. That is one of the reasons why we have to stand ready. And we cannot be naive. We have to be clear on this. And that is why that extra defense spending is so important. That is why NATO does not have, as an alliance, opt-out, side deals, etc., because we all have to chip in.
All right, second row, blue shirt.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary General.
Morning, sir. Good afternoon.
Jonathan Beale,
Yeah.
BBC News. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to go back to Iran. I know it's not on the agenda, but you raised it yourself. Donald Trump has mused as to whether regime change might not be a bad thing. Do you think regime change in Tehran would be good, or would you say don't go there? And then secondly, NATO has in the past intervened in regions outside the Euro-Atlantic. So I'm thinking of Libya in 2011, in Afghanistan. If Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, it's a hypothetical, but you talked about NATO interests and defending its interests and responding. Would NATO intervene if Iran tried to close the Strait of Hormuz? Thank you.
Well, let me say the following. I have to restrain myself on commenting. Of course, I would love to do that and answer your first question, but as Secretary General of NATO, it is my job to make sure that the 32 allies have what they need to have in terms of spending, industrial production, the support for Ukraine. That's what this summit is focusing on. And anything I would now comment, other than what I said in my introductory remarks on Iran, is not helpful. It is deviating from the core issue at hand. And that doesn't mean that individual allies will not discuss this here. It doesn't mean that individual allies might bring it to the discussion on the table, at the table on Wednesday. Of course that can happen. But it's not why NATO... And when it comes to your second question, it is true that for some years NATO has been active in theaters outside NATO territory. I think maybe the biggest change in NATO since the fall of the Berlin Wall is that we have to reconcentrate on NATO territory, because NATO territory itself is under threat. NATO territory itself is confronted with the massive buildup of Russia, the massive buildup of the military capabilities in China, the fact that North Korea, Iran, China are helping Russia, making Ukraine not into a regional conflict, but really a conflict which is concerning the whole world community, and really concentrate on that.
Okay, we have time for just a few more questions. In the center, fifth row, the woman in the beige jacket.
Okay, thank you. I'm Bibiana Piena from Norwegian News Agency. Our Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, today declared that, I'm sorry, I have to go back to Iran, but he today declared that the US attack on Iran is in breach of international law. So I would like to hear your position on this. And also, if I may, what are your biggest fear when it comes to the escalating conflict around Iran? What could possibly happen? What do you fear most?
Now, my biggest fear would be Iran having a nuclear weapon. Really, let's focus on the essentials here. My biggest fear would be for Iran to own and be able to use and deploy a nuclear weapon. It would be a stranglehold on Israel, on the whole region, and other parts of the world. And that is why NATO has said Iran should not. And this is a consistent position of NATO. Iran should not have its hands on a nuclear weapon. So, and I would not agree that this is against international law what the US did.
Okay, front all the way left.
Secretary General Latika Burke, The Nightly, Australia. Going back to everything that you have discussed about the integrated threat picture between the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic, is it your advice to Indo-Pacific countries that they also raise their defence spending to the new NATO standard?
Well, obviously, let me also here try to limit myself a little bit. I'm already very glad that as an alliance, we will decide most likely on Wednesday. There is an agreement in the North Atlantic Council on this to move to get to this minimum of 5% of defense spending. And I think that's great news to deliver all the targets we have set ourselves. Of course, I would not be against our friends in other parts of the world spending more. But for me then to have an active goal on this, I think is not befitting my position.
We'll come back to this side. The woman in the dark hair and the dark jacket.
Thank you. Victoria Klipka from TV8, Republic of Moldova. I addressed this question from the part of our media delegation.
Right.
So, as you know, parliamentary elections will be held in Moldova this autumn, and the outcome of the vote will be crucial for the country's future in Europe. Russia has now given up on its plans to stop Moldova on its tracks, and it's utilizing the entire arsenal of hybrid warfare tactics is tested and refined during the last year's presidential elections. So Moldova returns to Russian sphere of influence would be not only dangerous for Moldova, but for the entire region. What is the view from NATO headquarters on the situation in Moldova, and how could NATO and its allies help Moldova to resist this unprecedented wave of hybrid warfare waged by Russia?
Well, I can assure you from my previous roles, Prime Minister of the Netherlands, we were active helping Moldova as a country, and I'm sure it still continues. As NATO, there is a close cooperation with Moldova on these very practical issues. And Maia Sandu, the president of the Republic, myself, I visited her a couple of months ago when I returned from Odessa, and it was a very pleasant discussion. We are closely coordinating. I know that Romania, our ally, Bucharest, Romania, is of course also very much involved, making sure that Moldova can defend itself as much as possible against hybrid threats.
Okay, and one final question. The woman in the yellow jacket here.
Thank you for this opportunity. Secretary General, with the war in Ukraine, ongoing and rising tensions in the Middle East, along with US involvement, would you say NATO is facing one of its most challenging security moments? In light of that, could this wider instability also impact the Western Balkans? Should we from the Western Balkans be worried? Thank you.
Well, of course, the Western Balkans, 5 of the 8 Western Balkan countries are part of NATO, including Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, and obviously Slovenia and Croatia. So NATO is very much as a collective present. And then, of course, we have in Kosovo, KFOR, and we work closely with the European Union when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina and EUFOR. So there are close cooperations, and I'm myself in a sort of permanent dialogue with the president of Serbia, whom I know very long, who is a close friend, but at the same time we do not always agree, and it is important to keep that conversation going. So generally, when it comes to the Western Balkans, you can be assured that individual allies, but also as a collective, we are very much focused on that part of Europe. More generally, to your question, I think it is spot on, and it is a very good last question, because let's not kid ourselves. The security situation has dramatically changed over the last couple of years. Of course, in 2014, with the occupation of Crimea, but particularly with the full onslaught in 2022 on Ukraine. And since then, there's massive reconstituting of Russia, of its armed forces. At the same time, they working together with the North Koreans, with the Chinese, with the Iranians, and China itself also rapidly building up its armed forces to levels we have never, ever seen before. So the international security situation has changed dramatically. And that means that this summit is so important, because what we need to have is that when the call comes to any individual ally to deliver to the collective endeavor what is necessary to defend NATO territory in case of an Article 5 attack, then we have to be sure that all allies are able to deliver those capabilities, what they promised to deliver, so that when that call comes, we stand there together, united, not only in spirit, but also in practice. And that is why we have to meet this much higher defense spending goal than we have currently.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
We look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you.